Good morning and welcome to another BookBase interview where today we're interviewing fantasy author Megan Haskell. Megan has always been a fan of the fantasy adventure genre since she was little and was able to release her debut novel after spending her free time writing during commutes to work. Several years later, she was able to co-found the author wheel with USA Today bestselling author Greta Boris, and she has created multiple series that deal with multiple elements of fantasy and adventure. If you're interested in following Megan on her journey, please check out her website, meganhaskell.com, for special edition hardcover copies of her books, signed paperbacks, digital copies of artwork, and merchandise. And her Facebook is Megan Haskell Author, as well as her Instagram being the same thing. Megan, thank you so much for being here.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Of course, of course. So I love asking this for our first question, but tell me more about your passion for reading adventure novels when you were younger, and do you remember any favorite book series or standalone novels that you remember being like, this is the best thing ever?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I started reading fantasy in fourth or fifth grade when my dad handed me a copy of The Hobbit.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's where it all began, really. I think prior to that, it was like, chapter books like Sweet Valley Girls and Babysitter's Club and stuff like that, but that was my first fantasy novel, as I recall, anyway. Um, and it stuck. And so from that point forward, The Hobbit's slower paced, to be fair, but I love the all the different mythological creatures, all the different species of people that exist in these worlds, and that always captured my imagination. So from there, I went on to read, excuse me, Anne McCaffrey's Dragon Riders of Pern. Um, I remember I loved Anne Rice's books, the Vampire Chronicles, right? Vampire Lestat and God, is it Vampire Chronicles? Now I'm getting stuck on myself. Anyway, Anne Rice's books,
Mhm.
fabulous. And got into some, darker stuff in high school with more necromancer kind of, rising from the dead and a little bit more horror based in high school. But I've always read across the genre with anything fantasy I adore.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's been a lifelong journey.
No, that's awesome. Do you have any current or recent books that you've read that you have at the top of your head that you're like, wait, this is like maybe a continuation of your love for fantasy, especially as you're growing older? I'm sure your taste has changed a little bit, but just something that keeps you engaged. Has there been anything that you're like, oh, I love this?
I just discovered and tore through the series. I don't know, I didn't feel like it was a complete series yet, but nothing's come out in a few years. But Ilona Andrews' series, The Innkeeper Chronicles, starts with Clean Sweep. It's a little bit fantasy, it's a little bit sci-fi, it's modern day, it's a little bit cozy, but there's a lot of action and adventure too. So it's a lot of fun, and I think there are like five books in that series right now, and I think I read through all of them in the span of 3 weeks or something like that, which for me right now is just speed demon reading.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, thank you for sharing. And I totally can relate to that feeling of just being lost in imaginary worlds when you're younger. I feel like if anything, it makes the real world feel a lot more boring. I remember reading and playing video games. Video games was a huge outlet for me, and playing just fantasy games where it's like you're in a whole different world, you have to go on quests and stuff. And then right
Mhm.
after, you're doing homework. It was just such a different juxtaposition if you compare the two. And I was just like, I always wanted to come home and just keep on exploring the worlds that were out there. And I think one of the cool things that we see today is, because of technology, like you see a lot more immersion coming out of the media that we see today. I don't
Mhm.
know if you've seen the Dune movies that were in theaters. Oh my gosh, I still think about it. I listen to the soundtrack all the time, and I just
Oh, it's a fabulous soundtrack.
yeah, I love it. I just think it's awesome how, the people that I think that were also growing up loving fantasy and stuff get to the position where they're able to work and also create things that they loved, compared to like what they were consuming at a younger age. And so, I think it's really great that the fantasy genre is very much alive and it's just continuously growing and just keeps on inspiring other people to create stuff.
Yeah, and evolving. I think that's been one of the things that I've learned over, over my life as I've been reading, is that there's the classic fantasy or classic sci-fi, which was Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, right? These books that were just these epic tomes, and it was all about the world building. It was all about knowing the lineages of the characters and all their backgrounds and all this stuff. And then you got probably starting in the 90s, I want to say, it started moving more towards this action adventure, faster paced, where there were all the fantasy elements, but you were just supposed to know them. Right? There wasn't a whole lot of explanation around it. You were just supposed to go with it. Yeah. And that was great. And those books were fabulous. And now we're getting into like cozy fantasy, where it's essentially like you're in a library or a bookstore or a coffee shop or something, and it's just, yeah, there's a little bit of magic here, but the stakes are super low, and it's so fun and just light and airy, and like all these different little subgenres that have popped up over the years as the genre has evolved. It brings in just new readers, new points of view, new interests, and everybody kind of has their favorite flavor, and it just makes it a lot more fun that way versus just having like, this is fantasy. No, it's like there's so much you can read now.
Yeah.
And I think it's both good and bad, because you get these little silos of readers who only read this kind of fantasy, only read romantasy, or only read cozy or whatever, and so they don't necessarily see the rest of the spectrum that's out there, and they think that's fantasy, and it is, but also there's so much,
right.
And that's one of the things that I've found in my own writing. Like, all my series are very different. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's the same voice, it's still me, but they're each a different flavor of the fantasy genre, and I think that's kind of part of that evolution, which is fun.
Oh, absolutely. I think, speaking of what you said about how there's so many subgenres, I think now there's a lot more examples of people trying to blur the lines of like how we feel about reality and what we want in fantasy. Like, one thing that I really love about cozy fantasy is that some of these novels sometimes include a character that can't handle too much high stakes situations because they may have anxiety, or there's characters that have issues dealing with working with people, or trying to make friends. And I think we live in a time where I think The Hobbit, like, don't get me wrong, I love The Hobbit, I love The Lord of the Rings, but it was kind of really hard to kind of relate to those characters. It was more of like, hey, you're just an audience member looking into a world that's pre-made for you. And now I feel like you can look at these characters and say, oh, I get that. Like, I totally understand why this character would do that. I also have anxiety. And, there's some stories where I watch anime sometimes, and there's a subgenre of this idea of a real world character being thrown into a fantasy world. And I love that subgenre because, the character's freaking out, like, what the heck? All of a sudden there's elves and there's all these magical components of this world, but you were just living like in a regular society right before that. And I think that's also really interesting how, it's a weird line that people are walking, where it's blending like real life elements and then what we want to see in the fantasy world as well. And I think that's created a lot more, subgenres, like what you were saying. And yeah, I totally get that. I think fantasy is one of those things where when you think about the word itself, it's only a couple letters, but in reality it's a whole, like, it's a universe. It can go anywhere depending on where your mind takes you. And I think that's really exciting as not only a reader, but I'm sure it's exciting as a writer as well, where the sky's the limit. And this kind of leads into my next question. Your bio on your website talks about your time writing during your commute to work. First of all, I think that's really funny and really cool, because I think if I was on a really long commute, I'd be doing, a lot of stuff like that as well. But how did you get the idea that would eventually become the concept for your first novel, Sanyare, The Last Descendant?
So The Last Descendant was actually inspired after I was done working. So I had my first daughter, and she was about 3 months old, and I literally had a dream about this character.
Oh.
And she just kind of popped into my imagination, and I knew who she was. She was human, but she lived in this fantasy world. She'd been, kind of a second or third class citizen. She was raised by foster parents who were elves. And I started asking all these questions about, well, why was she there? What is this world that she lives in? How is it connected to Earth? Because if she's human, it has to be connected to Earth somehow. And then if it's connected to Earth, what other places might it be connected to? How would those interactions work? And it kind of snowballed from there. So I started writing when I was writing, or when I was taking the train and writing on the train during that commute. That was back in like 2006, 2007, something like that. I wrote multiple short stories. I started an organic gardening blog. I was doing book reviews. I had a book review blog for a while. I was doing all these different things. I started several novels. I finished one. It was terrible. But it took me, so I finally published The Last Descendant in 2015. So it's my decade of being published.
That's awesome. Happy anniversary. That's awesome.
Which makes me feel old. Um, but yeah, so it was like in 20, so from 2006-ish until 2015, all of that was just sort of practice and building up to what would eventually become that first novel. Um, so and then it's that inspiration. I don't know where that initial, image of this woman, Rie, came from. It was, like I said, it was just a dream, but it's all those different connections that have built up over, experiences and lifetimes and interests and all these different things, that kind of just come together all of a sudden. And, then you kind of get it in your blood, and you have to finish it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And here we are.
That's really cool. I think, I've been interviewing authors for a little bit now, and I love how when we talk about origin stories, some of them, like I think most of them, if not all, I believe most, they always come from something that is really hard to, I feel like, initially rationalize. Like, for example, your story started off with a dream. And I feel like sometimes people want to do things, but they are looking for an objective reason to do stuff. But I feel like the fact that you said that your inspiration started off with a dream about a character, it kind of shows that, like, you can really do anything you want by, just creating it and just wanting to express it.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of people out there that I do feel like have amazing dreams and they have a lot of ideas, but in a world where I feel like you're constantly searching for something maybe tangible to bring that out of you, in reality it's just your spirit. And if you really want to express yourself and really share something that you think is awesome, that's all you need. And I know we were just cracking that joke about how you're reaching the 10 years of writing, but I feel like when it comes to writing, it's a unique industry or a unique world to be in, because if you compare this to like athletes and sports, I feel like there's a bad connotation that comes to an athlete that's been in the industry for more than like 5 years. People are always constantly like commenting on, if they're in their prime, what their statistics are they able to keep on performing. But I feel like it's the opposite for writers, where if you hear that they've been writing for a long time, instead of it being like oh wow, that's weird, like they've been in it for a long time, it's more of like, it's seen as a respectful thing, where it's like, wow, they've really put in the work and they've really committed to wanting to work on their craft and release their novels. So I think that's really awesome how you've put in that much time, because I think that also shows us inspiration to say, hey, like, things don't really happen right away all the time. It's a process that takes a lot of patience and a lot of determination.
For sure, for sure.
Yeah, awesome. Oh, I'm sorry, were you going to say something?
No,
Oh,
no, I don't think so.
okay,
My
perfect.
brain kind of bounced.
No worries,
Sorry.
no worries. This actually leads into our next question, and this is kind of an interesting question because I have a business background, and I know your biography talks about how you had a desire to want to be an entrepreneur, start your own business, but you later on decided to choose to be a self-published author as instead. And I just wanted to ask, I'm sure there are similarities between being a self-published author versus being an entrepreneur. I'm pretty sure there are a lot of, things that you can draw lines with. And I just wanted to ask, what has that been like, being a self-published author and choosing that over your initial dream of, hey, I want to be a business person with my own business?
So I'm gonna argue
Mm-hmm.
that, well, I believe that as a self-published author, you are an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
They are one and the same. I am running my own business. It's just a business of one person.
Right.
So, I contract out all my artwork, the cover designs, character designs, things like that. I hire editors. I hire, I've hired people to help me with different aspects of my business, on an administrative level. I project manage the whole thing. So I have to know what I'm doing from, initial, pre-planning through writing, editing, book production. How am I going to market it? How am I going to get it out there? How am I going to launch? How am I reaching readers? How do I do all of the things? It's just, I'm a business of one. So I wear all the hats and I make all the decisions, and I love making all the decisions.
That's awesome.
That might be my favorite part. So yeah, I mean, so for me, like I have an undergraduate business degree from USC. I worked for one of the major accounting firms for 7 years before I had my daughter and decided to stay at home with her. And then, yeah, I wanted a job. I wanted a career that I could work and be productive and make an income and do things around my kids. And so that sort of making that decision was like, okay, so then I'm making my own business, doing something that is creative and flexible and, can be accommodate my life first, and then work second. And then I was already writing. So of course it kind of just made sense, and it all worked out that way. But yeah, I mean, to be an author, even if you're traditionally published, quite honestly, these days, if you're traditionally published, you get an agent, you pitch your books to big publishing houses, you get a contract, and you're writing for that publisher, or that book, is being produced by that publisher. So there are certain elements of the business that you don't handle yourself anymore at that point, but you're still doing marketing. You're still deciding which contracts to take. You're still deciding how you want to capitalize on your intellectual property, which is your book, and what are the contracts, and how do you want to give the publishing house all the rights to all your, other publishing outlets. So are, translations or audiobooks, or, so they're ebook only publishers now too. So like you make all these decisions, whether you're a traditionally published author or an independently self-published author, that's your business. And so you should treat it as a business. I think writers start out thinking they've got this like romanticized view of, I'm going to be in Paris along the Seine writing in a cafe, and then magically my book's going to be a bestseller, right? Like they skip the whole middle part. And certainly there are times when I've gone and written in cafes. It's not quite as fun as that romanticized vision. Right. It's certainly not in Paris. But so you have that flexibility in your lifestyle when it comes to the writing, but you still have to make all these other decisions and all these other things. If you want to make an income with your writing, you have to be a business person. And so yeah, anybody who's listening who thinks they want to be a writer and thinks all they have to do is write, again, you can do that. You can be a fan fiction writer. You can write as a hobby. You can publish for, on Amazon just for yourself and your friends. All of that is totally valid, and that makes you a writer. But if you want to be an income earning author, treat it as a business.
Right. No, I love that, because I mean, this does two things. Number one, I think it's a little bit freeing, because when I was in my business program, no one ever talked about business and the literature industry, books, especially with the arts and stuff, or, like when it comes to creative forms of media. When I think about business, it was always, okay, accounting, marketing, finance, or you're just going to be a project manager in like some firm. Good luck, hats off to you. Hope you don't, get sad along the journey. And I think one of the biggest issues for me was I love the creative aspect of business, but I feel like sometimes when you're going through, the education system and you're learning about business in terms of its, what it is as a definition, the concept of it, sometimes there's a little bit of a separation between what business is in terms of like the accounting and the right side of the brain where it's all about logistics and numbers, and then the left side where it's a lot more of the creative stuff. And I think now, when you, especially I've learned about this with BookBase, it's everything. Like it's creative, it's logistics, it's stressful, but it's also really lighthearted at moments. It's just a matter of being consistent.
Mm-hmm.
And I really love how, what you were saying about how being an author is being a business person. I feel like that sounds very freeing to somebody that I feel like only has a very maybe 2D idea of what business can be. And I feel like it kind of expands it to being, hey, wait a minute, business could be seen anywhere. It's not just in the industries that I expect it to be in. But on the other hand, I feel like it also kind of puts a little bit of a healthy pressure on those that do want to take their writing serious to make income to kind of think about these factors as well. Where, hey, if you want to write, that's really awesome. But if you want to be realistic about where this can get you, not only will it take consistency, but it will take a little bit of knowledge in terms of understanding, hey, how can I capitalize on the things that I'm making? Marketing is definitely huge in today's world, and I feel like for people that want to be an author and they're self-publishing, you have to at least understand what channels can I start promoting my work in. I'm sure finances is very important because if you want to actually, get a physical copy of your book, you're going to have to do your own printing. If you want to do digital, you have to look at what outlets you can put your book on. And you're right. I think a lot of people that initially think about writing, I don't think they think about that part of it. And it makes sense. Like, nobody goes into why do you want to be an author? Oh, I really love putting my stuff up on websites. Nobody really says that right off the bat. But, I think that's a lot of I think when I looked at your website and I saw your store, I saw how organized it was. I saw how you have a lot of options for different types of fans. Where if you're really into it, there's a restaurant menu where you can just grab something that has to do with the series that you're reading. Or if you're a little bit more laid back, you want to support, but you don't know if you want something specific, there's t-shirts. And then if you're a fan, then you can always get signed copies. Like, that was awesome seeing that on your website. It just felt
Oh,
so
thank
cool.
you.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
And I think that's something that, if writers and authors want to take their work to the next level where it's past the fan fiction side of it, where it's like, hey, I want to make this my life, I want to make this a living, I think it's really important to bring that up. And I really think that's awesome that, you were the one to share that, because it also leads into our next question. Can you tell us more about the author wheel? Because I'm sure that you have these types of conversations as well with your co-founder.
Yeah, absolutely. So the author wheel, we founded back, well, I guess it was right before COVID started. It was kind of when we like got our website and started doing stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the idea behind it was that between the two of us, me and my partner, Greta Boris, we had a really broad breadth of experience. We'd already been teaching together for several years in local outlets, the library. We went to a couple local conferences, things like that. And what we realized was that because she started out traditionally published, she had a small press deal for a series that was originally called The Seven Deadly Sins. So it was technically a 7-book deal. I mean, it was 3 books with the right of first refusal, so we can get technical, but basically a 7-book deal, because you've got 7 deadly sins, you've got 7 books to write.
Right,
you
right.
know so she had gotten this deal, so she'd gone through the process of pitching agents, of querying small presses directly, of going all these different routes trying to get published. And then I never went that route. I decided I was going to do self-publishing, but I also knew, like, as we just talked about, that I wanted to do it professionally, that I wanted my books to be at least comparable to anything that came out of any traditionally publishing, house. So I hired, from day one, I hired cover designers, I hired editors. I did all of that. I didn't do the like sometimes, and no shade on this, right? Because sometimes you don't have the funding to do this straight out of the gate. But people who make their own covers and throw them up on Amazon without any editing and then expect them to be bestsellers, those days were over by
Mm-hmm.
the time I was publishing. Like, that was true back in like 2012 when Kindle was first coming out, but you can't do that and be professional anymore. So anyway, so between the two of us, we had this broad, you know, experience. And we knew kind of what we were just talking about, that there are authors or writers out there who kind of expected this romanticized ideal of just writing and then having poof it be great. um, and we wanted to teach them what to expect and how to make the decisions that were going to lead them down which path that they wanted to publish. So whether, are they more in tune with, trying to pitch agents and editors and going through that slower process, but then potentially not having to deal with the project management side of creating the book? Or do they have more of a self-driven entrepreneurial concept like me? Like, how do you make these decisions? How do you choose which path or cross paths that you want to go down? And so that was where it started. And then from there, we started teaching more about, we did some, we have a course on genre, we have a course on tropes, we have productivity, all these different things that were just skills that we felt were needed in the industry for writers, especially newer writers who were just coming out of the gates, and didn't quite know where to start.
Right.
And the concept was to break it down into like little small chunks that you could easily accomplish, to not get overwhelmed by everything that was out there, because there's so much information online about how to do this, and a lot of it's conflicting and you don't know how to navigate those decisions. So if we could break it down into small, like easy to consume, overviews, and then point you in the right direction for deeper dive resources, that's the goal. And so yeah, that's the author wheel. That's where we came from. And we called it the author wheel because it's a cycle. You're constantly, it's write, edit, publish, market, repeat over and over and over again.
Right.
And every iteration you get a little bit better and you do it a little bit differently and you tweak things, and so you're just constantly on this cycle of getting your books out there.
Yeah, no, I think that's such a useful resource, because I think, especially when it comes to the book industry, I feel like sometimes very closeted. I don't think a lot of people really, I think there's two situations. There's one where you don't feel like you're getting enough information about what to do, and then the other hand is that you're getting so much you don't know how to file through and peek out and take out, like the golden parts of it. So I think having, two authors that, and I think it's also cool how, you deal with fantasy and Greta deals with like horror, suspense, and thrillers. Even just the idea of like into the creativity side of it. You guys are just very, I see it as like different, but
Yeah.
I think that offers a lot more inspiration as well in terms of the conversations you guys have and share, because the process is the same in terms of what you need to do to get your books out there. And you're totally right. Compared to how things were in the early 2000s, there was one way to market your book and how to succeed as an author, but in today's world, it's completely different. And I definitely think the pandemic did a job at digitalizing everything, where we went from everybody going to work physically, now we have remote work, now we have streaming services taking over cable TV. We have all these things happening on a virtual scale, where I feel like people get overwhelmed with knowing how to, when to do what and how to do it with technology that's around us. So I think that that's such a great podcast. And I wanted to ask, if you don't mind sharing maybe one, like, what is a common roadblock or maybe a obstacle that you see writers encounter when they're trying to, write their first novel or something? Because I feel like there might be some.
Yeah, there are several. The one that resonates the most for me, because it was definitely my issue when I first started, was simply time and consistency. And how do you actually get your butt in the chair to write when you've got a day job or you've got kids or both, and so I think that for me, that was my biggest roadblock at the time. I just didn't have time. I know for Greta, because her kids were out of the house, and she was semi-retired when she started writing. It was kind of the opposite. She had so much time that she never got anything done. Like she couldn't buckle down and again get her butt in the chair and make it consistent and do it over and over. It'd be like, oh, well, I've got this friend wants to go out for coffee, or I've got this appointment, or whatever, and it would just all interfere.
Right.
So that was actually one of our very first courses, and the things that again resonated the most with me was, how do you look at your schedule and find those lost minutes that you can sit down and write, even if it's just for 5 or 10 or 15 minutes at a time. If you've got an app on your phone that lets you write, like Google Docs, or I use Scrivener, which has mobile apps. You can write on your phone while you're standing in line somewhere, or the one I used to do all the time was my daughter would be at Taekwondo and I would write in the car. I'd sit in the car and write while she was in her Taekwondo class. Or if you're working, it was writing on the train, during the commute. Like, rather than driving in and spending 2 hours in the car, I was lucky enough that I lived near a train route and I could take the train. And so by doing that, I freed up, 2 hours of my day to sit on this little old school, like, it wasn't like, it was a Dell. It was about that big.
Oh man.
8 inches across, maybe. Teeny little thing, and it was solid state, so it was this expensive teeny little device at the time.
Right.
It had a solid state drive, and I'd sit there and I'd write on the train. So finding those pockets of time where you can just be like, nope, this is what I'm doing right now. I'm not gonna scroll Facebook, or I'm not going to talk on the phone, or whatever it is. I'm not going to schedule appointments during this time. Whatever it is, you set up a schedule, you find ways to work that into your existing life so that you actually get it done.
Right. Yeah, I think it's really hard to, balance the fatigue you get from everyday life with the personal deadline of, hey, I want to write something, because I guess it's definitely delayed gratification in the sense where, when you're writing it, you may not feel the absolute best feelings of being a writer, but you're doing it for the sake that, at some point in the future, you're going to get something that's complete, and it's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be yours, and it's going to be something that you wanted to work on. But, to get to that point, what does it take? Well, it does take the consistency, because, the problem is, one day you probably have the best idea in the world, and then all of a sudden reality hits. You have a job, you probably have responsibilities, you have things you have to do, and then that it's hard to keep that motivation when you have to deal with so many things in everyday life. So I think that's really important. For me personally, I've always made Sundays my writing day. Like, I do not sacrifice my Sundays when it comes to writing. Like, I do tell myself, whatever happens on Sunday, when you go to bed Sunday night, the chapter needs to be done or something. And that's kind of my, my way of having a natural alarm to wake up and be like, okay, it's, get ready for it. Because, I think a lot of things, I think when you're also writing, you're discovering new ways to write. You're also adding a lot more details to the worlds that you're creating, or you're doing a lot of homework for yourself. And that could also be tiring. You're like, I just, for students, I can imagine, I just wrote an essay. Now I'm writing a chapter. I'm just doing a bunch of writing. Or, if you're working in the business world, it's like, I just did so much research for this client, and now here I am looking up, what are some words in a different language that can help me create this world. Like, it's so much work, but it's so worth it for people that, get to that point where they look back and they say, wow, I created something. And I think another point is, like, you don't need to make the most money in the world to have pride that you created something. Even if it doesn't become a bestseller, the fact that you created something special, and it's full of just world building and imagination and a creativity source that you can only provide. I think that gives so much confidence. I feel like if I wrote a book and I had it with me all the time, I'd do what every other author's doing, where I'm just showing it around like, oh yeah, I don't know if like, I'm a writer, that's so cool. So I definitely think,
ask me about my book.
Oh, that's awesome. That is awesome. I love that. I would be doing the same thing. Probably have a t-shirt and a hat. No, I just think that's awesome. And I'm really happy that you're able to, talk about that point, because I think that's a very, very common roadblock. I think for not even just writers, just for a lot of people in general, just to do something. But, leading on to, following up on that consistency question, just things going on, what's in the future for you?
So actually, I am currently working on, this is my epic fantasy, the first in what will be a trilogy. I wrote this one and published it right as COVID hit.
Ooh.
So it came out in April 2020.
Bad
timing.
Yeah.
So I'm finally like I had written the first draft, but it was kind of a hot mess. It needed a lot of editing, a lot of work. Mental state was not great during that
Yeah,
time.
I don't blame you.
Creativity suffered. So I set that draft aside. But earlier this year, it was calling to me. So I went back to it. So I am actually about to release the second book in that trilogy. I'm doing a Kickstarter first launch for that book, as well as uh, collector's editions, hardcover editions of both books one and two. So that's actually, I don't know when this is going to air, but that's actually going to be launching on Kickstarter in the next couple weeks.
Oh, wow.
Which is
Okay.
crazy.
That is so
Yeah,
exciting.
big deal.
Yeah.
I'm excited. So yeah, so that's coming out soon, and then I have a plan, right? So I have two books in this series, the Rise of Lilith series. Which I didn't, I just realized I'm holding things up, but I don't actually know if this is going on camera. Is this going on camera?
Yes, yes. No, absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
perfect.
Yeah,
Perfect.
we
So when
see
I
it all.
point to things, I don't have to explain what I'm pointing at.
Mhm.
All right, great. So yeah, so Rise of Lilith series, that's Aether Bound. There's two books in that series, and the third book is about halfway drafted right now. So that one I anticipate launching in or well, first half ideally of, well, maybe I'll put, anyway, next year. That
Mhm.
one will come out next year. Book three will come out next year. And then I'm also have been doing special editions, like fancy, like faux leather covers, metallic foil, sprayed edges, the whole shebang, on the Senyari Chronicles, releasing them one at a time. So the first two are already out and available on my website, but the third one will be coming out in the spring, and I already have the cover on that.
Oh, how exciting. That's
I'm
awesome.
so excited. I think it's my favorite cover of the three so far, and they've all been absolutely fabulous. I don't think I have one of them right here, but well, this is the cover of the first one that I did. This is obviously the paperback, but
Right.
I did these in the special edition hardcovers. So this was the dust jacket of the first one. So imagine it's better than this.
Yeah, that's very cool. That is awesome. I love
So
seeing the artwork. I think, when especially with books, I think people will see your cover more than anything else. And I think having
absolutely.
just a great cover that just kind of capture. I love the foreshadow cover art as well, with the sword and just
Oh
the
yeah.
framing on the corner with like the bronze and gold. Like, I love that. So, approaching the end of the interview, and we are getting to our last question. So, BookBase is all about creating a community of readers and authors, of course. But, I think there is something special when we talk about things like book clubs and talking to people about books and essentially socializing around literature. And I just wanted to ask if you've ever been in a book club of any sort, or if you haven't, have you had any experiences with interacting with other people with books and just socializing around them?
Oh, absolutely. So I was in a book club years and years and years ago. I have not been in one recently. And it was like we met, we had a glass of wine and talked about whatever book we were supposed to read that month, and only half of us actually did. But it was more about socializing than
Right.
the actual books, and it was fun. We had a great time. But in more modern times, or recent years for me, the big thing for me has been doing live events. It's how I met you all from Bookbase, was at the KPBS San Diego book fair. I do the LA Times Festival of Books. I do WonderCon. I've done San Diego Comic Con. I've got one coming up actually tomorrow, Enchanted Realms up in LA. So these events are great ways for me to interact with readers and to share ideas, hear what people are liking or not liking, seeing what's resonating with people, what are the kind of current interests that are kind of floating around, and talking with people. So I love doing live events. I think it makes a lot of sense for me as a writer, because it gives me that instant gratification that you don't get when you just publish on Amazon, and there's no like there's no interaction there. You can read reviews, but there's no interaction, there's no
Right.
engagement. So I love doing live events. I've been a guest author, I guess, or gone into book clubs and talked about my book. So if they choose my book for their club, and especially what I've done in the past is like they'll get 5 copies or however many they need for their book club from me, and then I zoom into their book club and we talk about the books. And so it's kind of a like a freebie thing that I do for the book club when you buy, and I give discounts too when you buy in bulk. But that way, it's kind of this, again, building that community, building that discussion around books, and particularly my books, and how do you get that out there. So I love doing that. It's fun. I love answering questions and being interviewed, and I can talk about this all day.
That's awesome. No, thank you so much for sharing that. And I think, the passion definitely shows with the way that you talk about your stories and you wanting to help other authors and just how much you've put into, making something for yourself in this industry. Like, I think it's really admirable. And I'm sure, like, people that watch this interview will get that same sense of inspiration to say, hey, you know what? I can do something like this too. And the reality is that anybody can do it. It's not an impossible task. It's just, if you really want to do it and you're willing to look into the resources and put in the time, I think a lot of people would be surprised at what they can accomplish if you just, again, like, stay consistent and just stay with, being true to what they want to create. And I really appreciate everything that you've shared. Megan, thank you so much for being a part of this podcast. And, for, again, everyone that's watching, please check out meganhaskell.com, her website, to see all of the fantastic merchandise that she has. Her Facebook and Instagram, again, is at Megan Haskell Author if you just want to keep up to date on things on social media. But again, thank you so much. And yeah, have a great day.
Absolutely. Thank you.